Hello and welcome to the final Lunchtime Looks of 2023. My name is Heather Harris and I am the Curator of Education here at the Art Museum of WVU, and I'm also a Service Assistant Professor of Art History where I teach museum studies courses, including pre-K through 12 schools, the university community, and the broader community of Morgantown and North Central West Virginia. And the reason I talk about it as a Venn diagram is because I think it's most effective and the most fun to do that work in the places where those intersect. So where we can find community members chatting with students and where we might have students running programs for schools and that sort of thing. But one of the challenges of that work is how do you connect with complex and sometimes esoteric pieces of art and have meaningful experiences for a 4-year-old or 18-year-olds, and what sorts of strategies do we use to do that? So I am usually the person who is planning these programs and introducing our speaker, but I am the speaker today who's going to talk a little bit about that and using this exhibition, Nina Chanel Abney, as the inspiration for thinking through some of those issues of connecting different audiences and populations with works of art. So first, one of the things about Nina is that she wants the artist, the viewer, to be a discoverer of her work. She wants them to engage in an interaction and find a connection with it. So there's a quote on our entry wall there that says, "I always want the viewer to be able to feel like they have a connection with the work and recall some of their own similar experiences. I'm good at finding communities that want their stories to be told." So one of the things that goes along with that, however, is that there's not a ton of what we in the museum field call didactic information that goes along with her work. Kind of honoring that ethos, Bob, our curator, has chosen to display the works of art with what we in the field call tombstone labels. So tombstone labels, it's a rather macabre name, but it basically means that it has the artist's life dates. Nina Chanel Abney is a living artist, so her birth date, the title of the work of art, perhaps the medium, and just some basic information without much more information for you to discover. So that sometimes presents a challenge to the viewer, but it's a challenge that Nina wants you to accept. And it also is in line with current best practices in museum education. So as a museum educator, when I'm training students or docents to talk about works of art, we always talk about an inquiry-based approach. And an inquiry-based approach means one that starts with the viewer. It starts with what you see and what questions you have, and then provides perhaps some background information. And one of the most popular and prevalent theorists of inquiry-based gallery education for the past 30 years is Philip Yenawine and his colleague Abigail Housen, who started a movement called visual thinking strategies. So Philip was the director of education at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and Abigail Housen was a researcher at Harvard. And they came together in the 1990s and developed this strategy that is based around 3 simple questions. What's going on here? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can you discover? So I'm going to start with those questions for the audience. And actually, I moved my microphone over here, but I might, for the sake of our listening public, keep this as here because I want this to be a bit of an interactive session. So take a minute and look at this work of art. It is considered one work of art, even though it's on 3 separate panels, a triptych. And think about that question, what's going on here?
Well, I see men preparing to fish and then men fishing.
Okay. Men preparing to fish and men fishing. And then the follow-up question to that, and it may seem obvious, but just bear with me here. What do you see that makes you say that?
There are representations of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people.
Okay. And what do the
seven of which are, to me, feel like they're men.
Okay.
Maybe 2 could be something else.
And what are some things that they're holding?
Nets. And then I'm not sure what the cross pieces are that one person is holding, and then there's appears to be a single wooden piece being held by another person. So I'm not sure what those are.
Okay, so that leads us to our question of what more can we discover? So things that look like nets, and so that kind of answers the question of what do we see that makes us say that people are fishing? The nets make us say that people are fishing, right? But then we still have some questions about what else we might like to discover, because you said that there are these kind of cross figures here that we may have some questions about, and that some wooden pieces. So there's still some questions. What else? What else would is standing out to folks here? What other questions do people have? What other hypotheses about what's going on here? Yeah, sure.
It seems like they're like cleaning up, maybe like an oil spill of some sort. Like the water seems dirty.
Okay, so what makes you say that the water seems dirty?
Well, it's like black or brown.
Okay.
Also, I think that fish has 3 eyes, so that maybe isn't good.
Okay, so we see a fish that looks like it has 3 eyes, and we see water that looks black. So we talked about fishing, but also perhaps about cleaning up an oil spill. Anything else?
I want to know something about the numbers.
Okay, all right, so there are numbers on people's hats, on kind of the bibs and vests that they're wearing. What questions do you have about the numbers?
Well, the 2 people that don't have numbers and are not wearing something that looks like a bib.
Okay, so this is one of the most common things. George has actually hit upon the 2 most common questions in the 4 months I've been teaching Nina's work. When people come into these galleries, the number 1 things they want to know about are the numbers and the X's, the crosses, because we see that iconography repeated throughout her work, and people want me to answer why. But Nina doesn't really want me to answer why. So I've got a quote from her that talks a little bit about this that I'll read to you in a minute. But before I do, I'm going to set back that challenge to you that she's offered us. What connections do you all have? Let's start with numbers first. Numbers where? They're on their hats, they're on their clothing. What does that make you think of, or what connections do you have? In what other circumstances might people have numbered articles of clothing or things like that? Uniforms, okay. So they could be uniforms for sports. What else?
Well, I would think maybe if these people belong to the same company.
Okay, yeah. So if you belong to a company, sometimes like when I talk to students about this work, we talk about at WVU, we all have our WVU IDs that either start with 800 or 700 and then a series of digits after that. So we all have an identifying number that ties us to this institution. So often we have something like that. What other numbers do we have that tie us to other sorts of things? Lizzie? Okay. Phone numbers, social security numbers. What does it mean if someone says the phrase, they treated me like I was just a number? No name, right? It's kind of a de-identification, right? If we are identified by our WVU ID or our social security number, but it's not personalized. It doesn't give us anything about ourselves as a person. Anything else? Any other associations with numbers, numbering people? All right. So let's talk also about the X's. And again, trying to think through some of those, the challenge that she's set to us as viewers, because so many people come in here and want to know what's up with the X's. And they ask me that question. But where do we see X, or what could X symbolize culturally, that sort of thing? What associations do you have with X? Crossed out, okay, we're erasing it. All right, what else? Danger, right? No entry, like signs that are crossed like that. What else? Yeah.
I think of Malcolm X and sort of this claiming of the X as a last name as a marker for names that have maybe been lost through the process of slavery and enslavement.
Yeah, so since Jason's not mic'd up, I will, so Jason was talking about Malcolm X, and Malcolm X's choice to change his surname to X, because we know through the history of the transatlantic slave trade that people who were brought to this country in the process of chattel slavery were often given the names of their enslavers. And so there is a very pointed choice on the part of Malcolm X and others to claim the X as a refutation of that given surname, which I also think is important and might also, as we look at the identities of these fishermen, tell us something about perhaps a commentary on race and race relations. Sign your name with an X. And again, also we know in the history of enslavement, when slaves were not allowed literacy to read or write, that they were often asked to give the mark of an X as their kind of signature. Also, sign your name at the X. X marks the spot. So there are all of these kind of cultural connections that we make, and part of what both inquiry-based gallery education and Nina Chanel Abney as a contemporary artist ask us to do is not to look to the label there or the educator in the gallery to say, this is what X means, but to come up with those varied connections that, you know, X marks the smart spot has a very different connotation than Malcolm X. But I would argue that both are equally valid interpretations of what Abney's trying to do here. So in an interview where she was asked about her use of symbols and repeated numbers and letters, she said, "Symbols are as ubiquitous as language, and with the advent of mobile technology and rapid-fire communication, they are shaping up to be a benchmark of communication for our time. I have been especially influenced by emojis and their layered meanings. Someone once said to me that my work is indicative of the digital era that we are embarking upon, and I'd like to think that the disassociated use of letters, numbers, and shapes is akin to a time capsule. I am interested in a universal language, a unifying code that allows for people who would not regularly patronize a gallery or museum to connect to my work." So that adds another layer, right? And it's not the layer that any of us kind of came up with initially. But if I had read that to you first, or if that quote had been put on the gallery label, you might be racking your brain to think about emojis, and you might not have had associations with signatures, with danger, with Malcolm X. And so it kind of forecloses some of these possibilities that are also possible interpretations of her artwork. But one of the tricks about this inquiry-based approach, and I find it especially tricky about Nina Chanel Abney, is that she also is making very specific references. And sometimes I struggle as an educator to hold that balance of letting you all connect with the work, but also knowing that, for example, this is a very specific historical event. So this image that I'm showing you now is of the Deepwater Horizon explosion of an oil derrick in the Gulf of Mexico and the subsequent oil spill and pouring of gallons upon gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. It was a huge environmental catastrophe, wreaked havoc on ecosystems and industries all along for the past 13 years. So then, if we look at this image and know that connection, then we might know something else about this work of art, because even though those tombstone labels don't reveal much, they do reveal one very important thing. So the title, could you get up and actually read the title of the image to me? Okay, so the image is called Black People, but there's a parenthetical. What does the parentheses say?
BP.
The parentheses say BP. Black people, parentheses, BP. So why Black people? Why do you think? It's the subject, right? The parenthetical, BP. Where does that come from? British Petroleum, the company responsible for the oil spill. So it's a double entendre that is also investigating the work, the work and the labor that went into cleaning up this environmental catastrophe. Yes, exactly, because then, and this was exactly what Nina wanted to do, because she created these works of art as part of a series for the Gordon Parks Foundation. So Gordon Parks, is anyone familiar with Gordon Parks? Bob's familiar with Gordon Parks. I'm so grateful. So Gordon Parks is a mid-20th century American photographer, born into poverty in Kansas and a segregated United States. He eventually begins working for the Farm Security Administration, the FSA, and the Office of War Information, but has a job as a photographer within, so this is a time where a lot of social dollars were leveraged towards documenting the life of American workers and American labor. So these are some of Gordon Parks' photographs. So one of his big projects was photographing the fishermen off the coast of New England. So Nina looked at that as she was receiving this fellowship, and she said, after seeing Gordon Parks' 1943-44 series documenting the fishing industry along the Atlantic coast, I immediately wondered about who was omitted from that documentation: African-American fishermen. I was inspired to investigate the history of Black Americans in the commercial fishing industry, a legacy that is obscured. Fishing has deep roots in the Black community, yet the voices of Black fishermen are vastly underrepresented and their business in decline. So we have the kind of double connection to this horrific environmental event and also this art historical connection, and a kind of trying to fill in a gap in the canon and in the literature that she sees around the labor and work of Black men in the fishing industry. And as you say, the South, as opposed to the North, and looking at that particular legacy. So now let's go back to the kind of a meta-analysis of what I was saying about my work. All of that information, now you have a lot more information. You know what the specific historical reference is, you know what the specific art historical reference is. How do you see this work of art differently?
With the more data, I see more.
Okay, tell me a little bit about what you see.
Well, in that, without some of that information, when I first came to see this before today, that black, to me, I would not have picked up that that would have been an oil spill. 'Cause I didn't read the title. And I don't know whether, but again, a representation of water, but being black, I wouldn't have. So now now I can see the oil spill, which I would not have seen. Now, next time I come, I can't undo that. It's going to be fixed in my mind with this new data.
Yeah, exactly. So what is the role of information in museum education? Because I think that there is something helpful about knowing that and allowing you to process it. But I think there's also something about looking and seeing and connecting with it based on your own experiences and your own kind of impressions of the work. So what do you all think? So I said I work with students from pre-K up through college and adult populations. What kinds of conversations do you think you could have with a preschooler about this? This is the challenge. Yeah. So one of the early childhood primary school curriculum science is all about ecosystems. So one of the standards that they learn about in pre-K and kindergarten is about how ecosystems function. So the kinds of things, so perhaps you look at the Gulf of Mexico as an ecosystem. Perhaps you get a little baby food jar and you put water in it and you put a little fish in it. And then you take some vegetable oil and you dye that vegetable oil black with some food coloring. And you put that in there and you shake it up and you shake it with the, and you see what happens. You see it separate. Does the fish have access to what it needs any longer? Right? So you can have that same kind of visual conversation. Now, what kinds of conversations would you have maybe with a college student about it? What issues do you think are worth exploring with a college student? Climate change? Racism? Labor? And all of those things are the conversations that we have. We have classes on extractive capitalism that have come here. We have classes on leadership. I had the leadership studies program come, and we talked about what does leadership look like, what did leadership look like in the wake of this event. So there's all sorts of different entry points to this. But for all ages, I start with the inquiry-based entry point about what do you see? What are you connecting with here? What is of interest to you? And sometimes it's the subject matter. Sometimes people have questions about how things are made. Does anyone have questions about that? Yeah, Lizzie.
I was wondering if this is a painting that is meant to look like it's cut out pieces of paper, or if it was like actually pasted down.
Yeah, so it is actually collage cut out pieces of paper. And each of those pieces of paper is printed. So it's particularly visible here on the kind of like wood grain because you get that texture printed, but you have each individual color here, and then you have the color on top. And for those of you familiar with printmaking processes, the nets for me are some of the cooler parts because, and the dog's fur, because those are just bits of string that then have gotten that ink and pressure and going through the printmaking process and then create that feeling of the net and the dog's fur. All right, anything else about this one? I wanted to just quickly acknowledge the three-eyed fish. So one of the things that Nina is great about is references that are both fun and funny and lighthearted, but also deeply serious. So this is Blinky the fish. Blinky first made his appearance in The Simpsons after there was a meltdown at the power plant where Homer Simpson worked. And Blinky the fish was a fish who was a victim of that environmental disaster in Springfield that shows up with his three eyes. So here we see the three-eyed fish again, perhaps a sly reference, but what else is going on with the three-eyed fish? Yeah, so he's taking a selfie of the three-eyed fish. So what do we do in the year 2023 when we see something weird or crazy or out of the ordinary? You take a picture of it. And not only that, compositionally, the three eyes of your iPhone camera are mirroring the three eyes of the fish. So she's got this kind of subtle, cheeky humor that is going along with this very kind of deeply serious content. And that leads us really nicely. I'm gonna make you pivot. Bob, who thought he was hiding in the back, is now in the front. Okay, so that leads us to this piece. So this is the other one that I love to talk about here, and thinking about how we connect folks with this work of art. So I'll ask you again, what is going on here? What are the things that are initially striking to you? Okay, I'm gonna.
You see athletics and
Yeah, so it brings up college, so very upfront, a sweatshirt that says college, and Jason, I'm gonna skip ahead to this image. So, does anyone recognize this image? Andrea says yes. Andrea's probably of about the demographic to say yes, or not quite. So this is from Animal House. So Animal House is a movie about college. And what picture does it paint of college life, Andrea? Are people ensconced in lecture halls learning great philosophy? Yes, so it is partying, debauchery, there's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of, so again, this is this kind of funny, cheeky pop culture reference that Nina Chanel Abney is making about this, in many ways, deeply unserious film, and this pullover has persisted. The film came out in 1978, but you can still find people wearing these sweatshirts that just says college and this font, just like we have here. So this has persisted as this kind of pop culture touchstone, but as we look down here, there's another of her more serious references. So what do you see down here? What do the signs say? I am a, and it doesn't complete the sentence. What does, okay, so it makes you think fill in the blank. So how would you fill in the blank? Like I might fill in the blank, I am a mother, I am an artist, I'm a teacher. How would any of you fill in the blank? I am a curator. I am a student.
I think what I think sense is they're in this
Okay, so George is seeing a kind of division, pink, 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 and then blue. So I am a student, and it's kind of like maybe this is a prospective student trying to aspirationally hope that they're going to be in college someday. Anyone else fill in the blank? Okay. So I'm going to show you another historical reference picture now. And what does this sign say? I am a man. So this is from the 1968 Memphis sanitation workers strike, which was a strike, as you can see, black men here working in sanitation work. What is sanitation work? Yeah, garbage collectors, cleaning up the streets, those sorts of things. Advocating for their rights as workers. So why are they saying I am a man? It may seem kind of self-evident. It is evident. It is men holding up those signs. Why are they saying that?
Because at that time, the whites didn't consider them.
Right. So it is an affirmation of their humanity because as black men, they have been denied humanity through the history of race relations in the United States going back to the days of enslavement. So they have to say, I am a man, I am human, I am worthy of the wages, the working conditions, and the dignity and respect. Right. And so this was actually the last place that Martin Luther King Jr. spoke before he was assassinated in Memphis. But I am a man, and I am a. So what, over 60 years later, or close to 60 years later, is the difference here? What does leaving it blank here do? Okay. Okay, so George says, I wouldn't go to I'm a man first. I would go to I am a human being. So if we're affirming our humanities, does this affirm the humanity of everyone? I am a man? No, not necessarily. There's a lot of research and scholarship about the role of women in the civil rights movement and how they might have not been included in the ways that that they should have been, or how their achievements weren't marked in the ways that they should have been. So it opens it up. It opens it up to be broader. It opens it up to be more general. It also opens it up to be more inclusive. So looking at the color palette here, does anyone recognize this image? So this is the trans pride flag. Yeah, so this is the trans pride flag. So if I am a man is very entrenched in kind of the gender binary of man and woman, leaving it open and then also creating a color palette here that mirrors this, leaves it open not only for you to say I am a woman, I am a man, but to think beyond that binary, think more toward common humanity for all. And also different kinds of roles or positions we might hold in different other ways we might fill in that blank.
What led me away from that, though, was the Paisley
Uh-huh.
of the 60s.
Uh-huh.
So the first thing I saw was their college students, and in the 60s, and it would be Paisley.
So you're saying that the patterns give.
Yeah, the shirts.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think.
Sure, I understand what you're
No.
saying, but what
No, and I think that absolutely, she's mirroring a kind of dress, especially, you know, in the kind of jackets and sweaters, and that is not necessarily contemporaneous. Right, it's this preppy of, you know, 50s, 60s, and then we have this pop culture reference to the 70s, a historical reference to the 60s again. But that also then leads to more of this kind of openness in thinking about this. And then we go back to what was the funny, lighthearted reference here. And I talked to college students about what this might mean. I'm going to pick on my college students in the room. So you said you're in your second year, Lizzie, right? Okay. So, Lizzie, are you the exact same person you are when you came here? No. So one of the things that happens in college is a tremendous moment of identity formation. We both start to form our ideas about who we are as people looking towards future careers, but it's also that first time that we're away from our family of origin or our family of care, and where we are kind of the arbiters of our own time and social networks. So all of the sudden, you might get a chance to make choices about how you would fill in these blanks that were not open to you before this time period. Anything else with the connection to kind of college and university life? Because I think this is a really important piece for us to have here right now. Yeah. Okay, so college is associated with intelligence, and we also know that colleges in this country are highly segregated for a long amount of time, and thinking about that association of this kind of preppy college wear as affirmational not only of humanity, but of intelligence. I think that's absolutely true. And I did just want to, I'm not going to make us move again, but I did, this is was one of my personal favorite finds. If you kind of look over your shoulder to this corner here, there is another Animal House reference that I was able to get this direct screenshot. If you look at the composition of the three people in this image, but what has Abney played with in that image? What has she changed around? What is different from there to there? Yeah. So there's certain things like the pom-poms in terms of the colors and things, but she's really playing around with race and gender. The central figure here has hair on their legs, has very broad shoulders and very large feet, but also has breasts, long hair, red lips, and so has kind of a gender ambiguity about them. And then we go from the very blonde bouffant hairstyles here to dark-skinned black women as the model of beauty in that kind of collegiate sense. So she's playing around, so she's taking this pop culture reference and playing around with both race and gender. So again, I've talked a little bit about how I address this one with college students. Now let's think about preschoolers again, because this is always the challenge. What do you think? Where do you start to have these conversations?
I think it's still important to reference a preschooler's own identity. They can still look at it and go, I am.
This is huge. Kids, you all were super quiet. No one wanted to tell me what you all were until George told me he was a human. But preschoolers want to tell you all the things. I am a soccer player, I am a brother, I am a first grader, they want to tell you everything. I'm a reader. They will answer this a million different ways. And so I think you're right, Lizzie. It is this starting early with this kind of affirmation of identity. And then if you want to say things that are aspirational for that group, I am a good friend. You say that to everyone that is in your group, and regardless of their race or their gender or things like that. We also do a lot of kinesthetic work with little ones because we know that they can't sit still. So we'll do poses where they pose like the sculpture, but like the prints here. And then going back to that question of how these pieces are made, we also make collages, collage-style portraits with the students right here in the galleries. Gallery-safe materials, of course. My colleague Karen is not here, but I have to say that. We don't use scissors or glue. We actually just put out a huge sheet of chart paper and a bunch of different colors, especially you get scrapbook paper with these patterns, and then have them rip and tear to create their own faces in this style of Nina Chanel Abney, which we've had great success doing. We actually posted some pictures of some third graders doing that, and Nina herself liked it on our Instagram feed. So hopefully that means that even though I've given more information than perhaps she wants, that she still is happy with the work that we're doing here to engage all sorts of people around her really powerful works of art. So that's what I have for you all today. So I really made you all work for it and talk. Does anyone have any extra questions for me? Yeah, Lizzie.
Is the green, I'm not sure, I can't tell if they're like just the same width or line, or if it is text that has been drawn, like lengthened.
Oh,
so it can't be read.
Yeah, I think it's just lines.
Okay.
But if you I see what you're saying there, that it could possibly be text, but I think it's just lines. I read it as grass, and one of the things I've talked about when we look at this is perspective, because in that image that I showed you of the protesters, the signs are very front and center, and the people are behind. And here we have the people almost as a monumental scale, and you're at a worm's eye view looking up from the signs. Any other questions?
I have one more thing.
Sure.
I don't know if this was meant, but the completely different colors, it can both be like contrasting, but also when you're in college, a sense of feeling out of place.
Okay, so you're talking about the contrast between like the background and yeah, so we have the pastels and the softer colors and then the very intensely bold grid back there. And I liked what you said there, just it creates a visual contrast that's interesting on an aesthetic approach, but it also could have that sense of kind of feeling slightly uncomfortable and slightly out of place, as some of us do in college and still. Well, thank you all for joining us here today, and we will have a new slate of exhibitions and programs for you starting in January. So follow our social media, and we will keep you informed about those updates. All right.